my history comes from being previously head of aviation at a small company called ACOM, and then set up my own company where we do pretty much cradle to grave work on projects on airports around the world, and a lot of that involves airport acquisition and the purchase of some fairly sizable airport assets. The big issue for me that I see is that when we look at carbon footprint on an airport, and you can debate these figures, about 88% of the carbon footprint is really the aircraft in the air between the two, the arrival and destination. You've then got something like 7% of the carbon footprint is roughly 7% on surface access, and then 3% on taxiing, 2% on the actual terminal. These aren't my figures. These are figures that were developed when I was at ACOM actually. But the point I'm making is that the real big savings to be made on carbon are the aircraft in the air. And we have a real problem in aviation, is that we keep being really successful. And we have something like 3.7 billion passenger movements around the world today. By 2036, there'll be another billion on top of that. And it's going to keep growing. And I think the initiatives that we have here at Gatwick are excellent. And actually, I think they've moved on a long way, even since I was, winging it around the world for that little company. But I have to say, on a strategic level, we are very short-sighted in this country. We had a wonderful airports commission, but I think it was just singularly short-sighted. We don't need one runway by 2030. We don't need 2 runways by 2050. We need 2 runways now. I think it was patently clear from Doug's presentation that we have a runway that's a single runway airport at Gatwick that's operating at absolute capacity. And I know from experience you cannot feed any more aircraft down that runway, or there's precious little capacity left in it. And we see that Heathrow falls over as soon as there's a heavy snow. So that's really the main strategic point I would make, is that for me it's all about the aircraft in the air, it's all about the number of runways. So that was the principal point.
Thanks, Alex.
Al McBride, independent consulting engineer. Gentleman on the right, I didn't catch your name. Simon?
Simon.
Hi, Simon. What percentage of Gatwick's power, say electrical power or power, is generated by renewable resources?
Auburn Thurston, representing, I think, Flexi Solar, and I'm a little bit hesitant about that. Following on from it, exactly that. Belfast City Airport, Aldergrove, has a solar park, 3 megawatt solar park, about a mile or so away. And I just wonder what ambitions Gatwick has got in terms of on-site generation of clean, low-carbon energy.
We buy 100% renewable energy, electricity, for a start. We have a fairly small solar array just to the north of the western end of the runway. And we have been in discussions with some suppliers fairly recently to look at the possibilities of an off-site array, but on a single wire. So those sort of discussions are taking place to see if there is some way that we can make the business case work, and we can come up with a sensible solution.
Renewables aren't free. In other words, the energy is not free. You have to expend energy to get energy. So, putting up solar arrays has a carbon cost, and it's worth remembering that. And I think frequently those sort of costs aren't factored into the equation. And I'm not saying it's not a net positive equation. I'm saying that it's not factored in. It might be I just want to make a couple other points in response to the comments at the beginning. And that is, I think, without, again, getting too quibbly about the figures, I think the figures that were described are probably not as up to date as we've assessed. That being said, I think, of course, the aircraft taking off and landing is a massive carbon cost, but I think the built environment of Gatwick is a very big area and has a lot of buildings, and therefore it's probably makes better sense to compare the performance of the built environment at Gatwick with the performance of the built environment somewhere else. And in a sense, therefore, what we're trying to achieve, I would suggest, is a better performing built environment than, say, other infrastructure projects or the equivalent, because, of course, if you're comparing it to fuel use, you're not hiding to nothing. It is a comparatively small amount. So I think it is a question of doing the best in the circumstances in relation maybe to other things.
Simon, can you just pass to Alex? Alex, just so Alban mentioned Belfast, Aldergrove as the solar thing. In your experience, are there other countries or the worldwide airports that look at generating their own electricity, or is this?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, the ACI have a program of carbon accreditation that's been going for some years, and absolutely. And I think on the figures, I deliberately said they were variable because it depends what route you take. So on a long haul route, it's going to be very different to a short haul route. So there's a lot of debate around that. But the one thing I would just like to say in terms of carbon, and I partly feel like I've almost pitched up to the wrong seminar, but I genuinely think there's a danger that we focus solely on carbon, but actually these guys are not. I will say that now. But I think there are certain areas of the industry where I'll describe carbon like the environmental equivalent of a speed camera, where as long as you slow down, tick the box, and then you speed up again, you ignore everything else. And I think there is a danger that when we started on this sustainability journey, maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, it was it was a whole multitude of things. It wasn't just about carbon. I think in some areas, and I'm certainly not saying here, because I think some of that was excellent. Well, it was all excellent, but I just think the focus perhaps can get a little narrow. And there are other things to measure and to look out for.
Neil Wallace from a company called Aquaspire, a manufacturer of pipes. Just very interested in what the driver is here, because I understand that there may be corporate objectives, but what sits behind the reason you have carbon objectives within the corporate within your corporate objectives?
Okay, and the lady behind.
Hi, I'm Beth, and I'm just a citizen. I would like to know, to what extent are you required to push back on aircraft so that they comply with the needs of the community in which you exist?
Thanks, Beth. Nobody at Ecobuild is just a citizen. You're all participants, so I think don't worry about it. So I think, okay, so there's the corporate objective there, and the embedding the corporate objectives, and then there's the relationship with the airlines, sort of thing. Doug, you've got the microphone. Go on.
Yeah, no, the corporate objective. I think, as I said throughout the presentation, our whole ethos is about trying to make the airport as efficient as possible, and reducing our carbon is going to make us more. It's going to drive us to be more efficient about how the airport operates. So it's going to be beneficial to us as a business. It's going to be beneficial to the airlines and the passengers, because effectively, the more efficient we make the airport, the slicker it becomes, the better it is for them to operate and turn around their aircraft. It works the whole way through. So, it's a big corporate weight, I suppose, to some extent as well, because it's an expectation. We're viewed as being that horrible polluting airport, so we have to try and do things that show that we are reducing the pollution, we're reducing our carbon, we're working with the community. That's why our targets are spread as wide as they are, because it's not just about focusing on carbon. There's a lot more to it. So it was an interesting question, and I suspect it's brought around primarily by noise. Yes, and noise and air quality. Yeah, So, it is something that we have to work with the airlines to try and improve, which was, as I said, for both of those targets. We can, to some extent, put pressure on the airlines to make sure that they are bringing in the most efficient and the most up-to-date aircraft by charging them different amounts for their landing fees, which is one route that we do. But we work with the airlines all the time as well, also to look at what's the best ways that we can improve on the landing and the takeoff approach. So the way that an aircraft comes into the airport can be done in a number of different ways, some of which produce more noise than others do. Some of them require to use the engines more than others. But on the takeoff, you've got a similar thing. To some extent, you want to get the aircraft as high as possible, as quickly as possible, to cut down the noise. You're doing that, you're going to have to use the engines more, which means you're probably going to be putting more pollution out. So there's a balance to work in this to try and come up with the best way for the communities that are in the area around us. We have a group called GATCOM, which is us working with our local community, and we meet on a regular basis. They discuss what's going on, what the problems are, what the ways are that it can be improved. And so it's an active engagement.
Something. In response to the first of those two questions, just a quick point, which was that another example of infrastructure is Anglian Water, where they actually make their decisions on the carbon cost, not the financial cost. And they believe that means if you get the carbon right, the money follows. And they're quite happy spending a lot of money. They have £1 billion capital investment program, and it's all infrastructure, and I'm sure you probably sell to them for all I know. So that's interesting. That's a sort of a different change in mindset, and I think what is also interesting in that, in terms of innovation, is instead of saying we want you to build a pumping station to move water from A to B, they go to the market and say we want you to move water from A to B. You come up with whatever it is that's going to do that. So I think innovation and so on goes in with this.
So to pick up on that point though, is that because it's a more regulated environment?
No, I think the reason why Anglian Water done, and I've spoken to the people there on several occasions, is that it actually comes from the top. It comes from the chief executive, who believes that is a better way to do things. And he's put his money, so to speak, or he's probably his investors' money where his mouth is. But I think it's a really good example of, and I suspect the infrastructure they build is by and large not enormously complex. I'm not saying it's not, but it's probably relatively simple in terms of other infrastructure projects. But it seems to be a living proof of an efficient way to proceed.
Kieran Jebb from UCL. I just wanted to question the assumption that there is this idea of good growth in the volume of air transport. I would have thought that it would be wholly irresponsible in an environmental sense to encourage more people to fly and more flights to be taken. I just wonder, from a financial perspective, is there a danger of investing now in a new runway infrastructure, which will take many years to build, only to find that actually that is not required anymore, whether it's by lower uptake of flights, whether it's a carbon tax that is applied properly to aviation? Are we in danger of locking in redundant infrastructure?
My name is Anna Jubran. I'm from Deloitte. We're developing internally a piece on the integration between different modes of transportation, especially surface access and airports. And I'm very curious about the case of Gatwick to expand the airport together with the expansion of the rail surface access. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
I would answer the one about growth, in that the Airports Commission have recently published their response after doing a lot of work to investigate what the need was. And they came up with the fact that, based on the passenger numbers that they were looking at about 3 years ago, that the airports in the southeast needed additional capacity by 2030. They needed an extra runway to cope, and they would need another one on top of that by 2050. The passenger numbers have already exceeded what it was that the Airports Commission said they were going to at this stage by quite a sizable amount. So and the fact that we've already said Heathrow is full, Gatwick is full at times, Stansted is full at certain times of the day as well. There is a need there, and passenger numbers continue to go. So I sort of doubt that we're building something that's not going to be used, unless we come up with some fantastic other method by which we can transport ourselves around the world.
Yes, I mean, I would agree with that, that aviation has shown growth historically through, on a continual line around the world. There's been troughs and peaks along that line, but it continues. And I think what we have to do is to be ready to receive that growth, but to do it in a sustainable way, to actually try and manage ourselves rather than ignore the fact that it's going to happen. So I'm not suggesting you were doing that, but in terms of locking in redundancy, I mean, we know at the moment at Heathrow, if you fly into Heathrow, you will spend 20 minutes circling in the air. The key, what we've got to do is get aircraft on the ground and get those engines turned off, because it's a frightening waste of fuel.
So Doug, did you just want to pick up the second question as well? Because I think that there was a recent report from Transport for the North's International Connectivity Commission that said international connectivity starts on the ground with that surface access and that access to the airport. So that's kind of key part of some of your plans, isn't it, about that integration?
Yes, it is, and we're shortly, I believe, to publish a new surface access strategy at Gatwick, which should start addressing hopefully some of those points. From the second runway perspective, a lot of the growth that we were needing in surface access was growth that was already planned by Network Rail and Highways England, although we were planning to put in specific feeders off the M23 straight to the new terminal. So to try and reduce some of the pressure that currently exists on the junction 9 just outside Gatwick, and to take some of the load off the spur road. So there was, as part of that, there were plans, new flyover, etc. I think I touched on the fact that the railways are already carrying out quite a lot of upgrading. Thameslink have done an awful lot of work already. Our problem to some extent is capacity of the station. And that was the bit that I touched on. We do need to do something there to make that a better flow through in both directions.
Doug, can I just ask, is the station owned by Network Rail, or is the station owned by yourselves?
It's owned by Network Rail.
And is that part of the problem? You're amongst friends, go on.
I think it's the budget that has been put aside, which is a joint, I think, Network Rail government decision as to how much they've agreed to put aside to do the expansion. And I don't think it is really quite enough to cope with what it actually needs. And I think the previous group of presentations where they were talking about projecting infrastructure forward, that's what it needs to do. They need to look at that capacity 20, 30 years' time, because this is the opportunity they've got to do something good with that station and really make it work.
Because again, it's interesting on some of the points we discussed earlier about the role of rail in regeneration in urban areas. And we were saying in the last session, airports themselves are individual villages, they're like towns. The number of people that move through them is like a small town, sort of thing. So seeing that railway station as part of that integral movement, as opposed to just a bit on Network Rail's line, to us seems quite key. So is this about, again, where we started from today was infrastructure decisions being made locally by the people who are most benefiting from them, i.e. Gatwick, as opposed to Network Rail? Is that something you would advocate, that almost you would want that within the curtilage of the airport and the airport's control?
I think, yes, I don't see why we wouldn't want to have the station as part of Gatwick. To some extent, people probably actually believe it already is. It's got, what's the name on the platforms? It's Gatwick Airport. So, it's an interesting challenge for us to get involved in that dynamic, to work with Network Rail, to work with the suppliers, and to try and get that development going. We've got guys working on it full time to try and facilitate it. It is a big challenge, but yes, why wouldn't we want it?
Lucas London, Callison RTKL. A couple questions on the carbon with respect to the comment that Alex made, but also for Simon. Does the current Gatwick model account for the carbon footprint of various choices made in surface access? So modal choice that people make for how they arrive to the airport? And also in the context of taking a broader view on carbon in terms of total journeys within the country, does the carbon model somehow have a mechanism to be rewarded if, for example, High-Speed 2 in the future were to offset domestic flight being taken from Gatwick in a way that it could help Gatwick's numbers, even though it's perhaps one less passenger passing through? But you see what I'm saying? It's a carbon choice or a modal choice that then reduces the total carbon used.
Lisa Charles from Heathrow, so I kind of felt obliged to ask a question. Given that we've spoken at quite at length about capacity and the need to get aircraft quicker on the ground, would it not be better to have maybe sort of to depoliticize the event or the discussion and to have a sort of national framework or joined up thinking on aerospace modernisation and capacity, carbon, sustainable growth? Ending on a positive note.
That was very friendly, Lisa. So I think, okay, so there's the impact. Does mode share factor into some of the carbon calculations and the sort of carbon offsetting of other things? And then I'll let you answer Lisa's question to finish off with.
Well, to start with the first bit, the model is evolving, and it's still kind of early days. But I think the ambition would be to bring in everything. I think your second part of the question, which is to do with kind of offsetting and moving stuff around, I think the potential there for gaming the whole thing seems pretty substantial. But I think that certainly our ambition is to evolve the model and see where it takes us. I don't think either Gatwick or us know exactly where it's going to end up, but I think it's to get the widest possible model that we can that provides benefit. There's no point in us investigating stuff that's not providing a benefit, but if it's providing a genuine benefit to Gatwick, then that'll be something maybe they'll consider. So, yeah.
Yes, I mean, in terms of modal shift, just to quote the Environmental Audit Committee from last year, they said it's all about modal shift, and I completely agree. I think it's a challenge, but also when you look across many of the UK airports in the last 10 to 15 years, they've been really successful at shifting passengers away from their cars onto public transport. High-Speed 2, wow, that's a whole other question. I mean, we say in one breath it's all about modal shift, and what do we then do? We don't bring it straight underneath or into our primary hub. Sorry, Gatwick, but you know, now I'm not a rail engineer. I'm not going to get into discussions over tunnels and curves and all of that wonderful stuff. It's just a bit of broader thinking. It's a wonderful opportunity, I think. In terms of bringing everyone together, what we need is an airports commission. And then the industry can give their thoughts, and obviously we can make a very quick decision and get on and do what we need to do. Except the irony.
Thank you for the question. Really nice, positive. But yes, I think it's not just airports, is it? It's about infrastructure across the UK. We basically need to get a plan that says how we're going to develop our infrastructure across the country, everything, road, rail, airports, sea defences, the lot, and plan it properly for the next 50 years, at least. And yeah, you know, it's stupid that it comes down to, you know, two of our major pieces of infrastructure squabbling in public. It's just ridiculous. So thank you for the question.
I think it's a great question, and I think it's a really good place to end on. I think as the ICE would wholeheartedly endorse that. It's something the ICE has been arguing for some time. The National Needs Assessment, which we did last year, is trying to feed into the National Infrastructure Commission. Good luck to the Commission, I think, because it would be great if they could do it, Doug. We'll wait and see. Ladies and gentlemen, please show appreciation for the panellists in the normal way.